let me get started by, first of all, welcoming our guests. We have Jimmy Goldblum, we have KRISTY Guevara-FLANAGAN, and we have Maite Zubiaurre. And I'm very excited to have you here as your films make their way across the Oscar shortlisted docs. Congratulations. Jimmy, let's dive in and start with you. Tell us a little bit about how you met Mohammed, how his work first came to your attention, and what the initial conversation was with him about deciding to tell his story.
Yeah, so it's circuitous because I was actually working on setting up a documentary series for Apple Plus called Home. And so our researchers actually found Mohammed as part of the research process for that show, because Home is about architects, and it's about the ways that these architects thematically explore notions of home in their work. And so he was perfect. But an Apple executive who no longer works there actually ended up rejecting Mohammed's story for the series because they didn't think he lived in a fancy enough house. And mind you, this was happening in 2018, when these conversations were happening. So the previous administration had just announced their Muslim ban. It was working through its way through the courts, and to have a person like Mohammed, sort of like a voice for Muslim immigrants and refugees, to have his story told was something that was incredibly important to me. And I think it was just like an act of like pure kismet, like a minor miracle, that at that time I was introduced to the former Congressman Dick Gephardt, who he was like Nancy Pelosi in the 90s. He was the House Majority Leader. And he was just apoplectic about the state of immigration, the way that our sort of marginalized immigrant and refugee communities were being spoken about in the press, the way that the president was depicting them. And he just really wanted to do anything he could to sort of offer humanizing portraits in a really dehumanizing climate. And so we presented him with this film, and he said yes. And I called Mohammed and I said, if I can tell this independently, would you still work with me? And thankfully he agreed.
What version of the film were you pitching at that point? Because it obviously becomes an international production, but you may not necessarily have started that way.
I think it was very much, certainly something that I was really taken with was I had read Mohammed sort of talking about the inundation of violent imagery, specifically around the Syrian war, and how in his work, in his artistry, he would take all the blood and all the bodies out and instead look at the hollowed out sort of architectural remains, allow the homes to tell the story. And I was really taken with that because my wife is also a documentary filmmaker, and she's from Pakistan. And for years, she was telling stories that were like, no one wants to know about the food culture of Lahore. No one wants to know about the music scene in Karachi. They want drone attacks. They want the Taliban. And, she had actually developed complex PTSD. And, I was seeing what violent imagery was doing to her. And I didn't feel like there was stories about immigrants, like Muslim immigrants specifically, that she could watch that really felt like it was something that she could sit through. And so that was the story that I was really drawn to with Mohammed. I was like really interested in telling a story about refugees and war that didn't use grotesque, like violent imagery as a way of building empathy.
So tell us a little bit about the diorama that we see presented in it, which is just like an astonishing piece of work. I'm curious a little bit about how that's presented. I mean, how is that work? How does that reach its public? What's sort of the scope of what his work is?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple there. I mean, there's many pieces in the film actually. Obviously, we shoot a lot of it very macro, so sometimes it's hard to know where we are. But as he sort of says in the film, it started as a very nostalgic project, and he was doing it privately for about 10 years. But, no one really knew. It was just for himself. I mean, it was really art therapy that he was unaware was art therapy, right? Just like a way of mourning, at first, just not being able to return home, but then the way that the war was destroying the country that he loves. And so he actually started working in refugee resettlement as the Syrian war broke out. And it was actually some of the refugees who he was working with who actually became aware of his art and encouraged him to present it. And so, he developed a following. I mean, like at this point, Mohammed, he's actually now in the permanent collection of the Brooklyn Museum. Like he is a very respected artist in terms of just his ability to create empathy for the refugee experience. Yeah, I could talk a lot about it, but I think that suffice.
When you decided to go shoot in Lebanon, tell us a little bit about meeting Muhammad's mother and getting her to participate as an on-camera subject.
I mean, goodness, like, I mean, bless her, honestly. Like, she was very patient with me. I mean, we, as you sort of alluded to in your question, we had no idea that we were going to Lebanon when we first, ventured to Connecticut to do this portrait. And it was really when I sort of witnessed a couple of those Skype calls with Muhammad and his mother that I was like, oh, you're actually going back to see her over, like, I guess Christmas break, technically. Could we come? And he was like, yeah, of course. And then he kind of got his mom on board. And you're like, Mom, it's an artistic portrait of me. Don't worry. It's going to be just all about me as an artist. There's, it's really, you're going to be like just on the wall. They're not even going to focus on you. But as we got there, she and I built like a friendly rapport, and we shared a lot of meals, which I think is always a great way of building connection. And, I think she just became really comfortable with the cameras. I mean, certainly the scene with them in the hotel room, that was the last thing that we filmed. And it's not something that you can really set out to be like, this is what I want to get. I just think after a lot of time of building trust with Muhammad and really just being as respectful to our commitments as possible, that we were able to get a scene like that on camera.
Well, once you sort of move into that realm of, sort of like verite with him and his family, how easy was it for you to actually put the camera down and say that you were done shooting, that you knew that you had what you wanted? Because I could imagine there's a lot more of his story to tell.
Yeah, I mean, I always wanted this to be a short. I'd never actually done a short before. Like, my film career is completely backwards in that, like, I just started filmmaking with a feature film and like tortured myself in the edit for 4 years, not knowing at all what I was doing. My first feature, I shot 450 hours of footage. It was like, I did not know what I was doing at all. I didn't have the great, like, benefit of going to USC Film School, which would have been very helpful. I really taught myself in the edit. And so in this way, it was a very different approach in that I was like, okay, we're going to shoot on film. We're going to have a very formalistic approach. We're going to be, every shot is going to matter. I'm really going to be incredibly intentional. And I think after I filmed that scene, there was something charged in the air. Like, he had said goodbye to his mother. I don't speak Arabic, but I didn't need to know what just had happened in the room. I mean, it was literally like, there was just a palpable energy in that space. And then he like went outside to process, and there was just a lightning storm that kind of happened out of nowhere. It wasn't like that was on the forecast or anything that I had any part of setting up. It just happened. And I was like, I think we're done. Like, it just feels like we're done.
Well, for any of the cinematography geeks out there, the macro photography is incredible.
Yeah, thank you.
Tell us a little bit about how you shot it.
Yeah, I mean, my cinematographer for Connecticut is Ali Millar. I highly encourage all the students to go out and look up Ali's work. He is very, very talented, has done a full range, everything from, very indie documentary, just him and the director, to like full scale gigantic music videos for Bjork with like 1 billion people on set. And the thing with Ali is that he was doing a lot of commercial work at the time at which I'd met him, and he was getting really sick of it. Just, it felt very soul crushing. He's a weirdo artist from Vancouver. Like, this is not where his heart is. And in his spare time, he was actually building models in his garage and filming them. And I didn't know that when I interviewed him. I'd come to him for different reasons. And I was like, okay, well, you're obviously perfect for this because you actually know how to shoot models, which I do not. And so he introduced me to the idea of like the snorkel lens, which is essentially just a lens with a very long, very long lens, which allows you to go right into the artwork. So instead of being on the outside, you're really living in it. It brings it to scale. I mean, these are traditionally used in like Hollywood films from the 1950s, like The Time Machine or something, where you build model sets and then all of a sudden you have the hurricane, right? Like that's what that was devised for. But we were able to get one sort of out of the archives and use it for this. And I think it really breaks down the barriers between Muhammad's art world and the reality of what was happening in Syria and just his memories. Like it all sort of bleeds together because of that technology.
Wow. Has Muhammad's mom changed her mind on going to visit?
No. It's I will say that it's sad. It's sad because I'll give you bad news, and then I'll give you great news. I'll do that, which is that, you know, his family has not said a thing about the film. You know, like they haven't said a thing about the film, and I understand that. You know, I understand it because like it's all out there, and you know, like it's very uncommon. I mean, certainly, like I'm from a neurotic Jewish family from the Northeast. We do not like to have our dirty laundry aired. I get it. And like he showed vulnerability during our production that it was pretty uncommon. And so they don't know how to process it yet, because to acknowledge this film is to acknowledge the sort of brokenness of their family system, which would mean to like have to start over and recreate something new. And I just don't think they're ready to do that yet. However, Mohammed, since watching the film and just, you know, many things, quit his architectural practice actually. He was like, I hate working for these large corporations, like pitching on like the ExxonMobil campus architectural design. I can't do it anymore. And he opened a cafe in New Haven, Connecticut called Pistachio, which is essentially a little Damascus right by Yale. They serve Syrian coffee and pastries, and it's like beautiful. And he also got married in December to a beautiful woman in a Sufi ensemble. So like he's like, it's in many ways it's helped engender a lot of changes in his life, but I don't think the family is quite there yet. Yeah,
I'm definitely going to look out for Pistachio the next time I'm on the East Coast.
it's amazing. It's truly amazing.
Let me now switch over to talk about Aguilas for a little bit, and then we'll sort of bring everyone back together. So, KRISTY and Maite, your film, it says at the end of the film that it was sort of brought together in the beginning because of some research that Maite, you work on as an academic. Can you tell us a little bit about what sort of things you were working on that led you to find this organization and this story?
Yeah, of course, with pleasure, and a pleasure to be here. And congratulations, Jimmy, for a wonderful film. So I was engaged, and I'm still engaged, in what we like to call a multi-pronged research endeavor called forensic empathy. And what forensic empathy does is it looks at the tight network of activists and artists and forensic experts that join forces to help migrants along the US-Mexico border, but in particular in southern Arizona. And part of that endeavor, it started actually with a scholarly monograph that I'm co-writing. And the urgency of the matter was such that I discussed this with my co-author, Jonathan Chrisman. And we said, you know, we need to look for different run that more impactful and more immediate. As academics probably in our audience know, a scholarly monograph takes a long time to be written and a long time to be published. It doesn't have a huge audience. So not being a filmmaker, KRISTY is the seasoned filmmaker, I approached KRISTY, whom I knew from UCLA, and brought to her the idea to do a documentary on not the whole spectrum of the ecologies of migrant care, but on Águilas del Desierto. I had joined Águilas del Desierto as a volunteer, and their mission is heroic, as I think the film is able to convey, and long-standing, because I have been doing this for 10 years. So it seemed appropriate to do a short film on Águilas, just on their mission, on one weekend search and rescue operation, which happens actually again for 10 years, and Águilas goes out at least once a month, and lately actually more often. So forensic empathy has other elements now included: artistic installations, feature documentary in the making, and of course, Águilas came out of that.
Wow. I can imagine that sort of work must also be, you know, particularly difficult to do as you encounter tragedy so many times going out. I'm very curious to know what the relationship was like having the camera there for the search. So, KRISTY, would you talk a little bit about how you decided to approach making everyone comfortable with the presence of cameras and just getting to know the volunteers and how you were going to work with them?
Yeah, I was really, as a filmmaker, I always just use my own innate curiosity to lead the way. And I was very curious about this organization that Maite told me about, their mission, what seemed like a Sisyphean task of looking for remains and people in this vast wilderness, the desert. And I also am always thinking about myself as kind of a surrogate for the viewer and the audience and how they might see and approach this film and the subject matter. I mean, that's part of what I was so interested in, was that this would be a way for audiences to literally walk in the footsteps of migrants and to have a very different experience and relationship to migration and the risks of migration, why people cross, and just kind of the tremendous debates that go on in our country about this. And so I knew that it had to be kind of embedded in this search itself. The search, however, is very hard to film because they're really fanned out across a large swath of landscape and communicating by walkie-talkies, and we're trying to keep up with them and capture what it's like to be on this journey. But it's a journey that in real time never stops, right? Except for, maybe lunch and sometimes drinking water and that kind of thing. So also, as a documentary filmmaker, what I love is just being reactive and adaptive to what I encounter. And so discovering that made me have to kind of shift what I was imagining in my head, how it was going to unfold cinematically. And so the walkie-talkies became a really necessary kind of narrative device because we often weren't there when something would happen. We'd run and catch up, but it would take a while. And we went on 2 searches to try to cover some of the breadth of the experience. And those searches are, 2 days each. So 4 search days in total to condense down to what appears as one search. And, just really have the audience be there in the desert, be there in the terrain, get to know Águilas and their mission when they were in action. And of course, Maite's relationship with Águilas helped open the doors to that.
Would you mind talking a little bit about how you get a project like this financed in terms of, is it a pitch process to an organization that's commissioning it? I mean, the urgency of telling this story is obviously there, and I'm just curious, when you have a story like this to tell, where you go to find people to back it.
Well, the fact of the matter is that you're often making it and pitching it after the fact or in process of making it, which is what happened here. Maite invited me to a search. It was a week away or even less maybe. And we scrambled together to figure out, who to bring and what to bring. We were a super small crew. It was the 2 of us, and the first search was the 2 of us and our camera person, DP David, and who at that time was a student at UCLA. So it was a film that didn't actually cost a lot to make. And at the same time, after that first search, we reached out to different entities to try to raise money, but ultimately it was our UCLA itself that came in with some of the funds. And again, we were making it. We were already making it. We weren't waiting for funding. It's maybe a little different than a feature where you definitely need some infrastructure and financial support because that's a long haul, but it's one of the pleasures of making a short film.
Yeah, we do have to thank UCLA, and it was certainly a low budget film. It didn't require too much financial effort. lots of physical effort though, and psychological strength. It was the first shooting happened on December 23rd, which says a lot about Águilas del Desierto, how they sacrifice even their well-deserved vacation. Most of the volunteers of Águilas del Desierto are workers, domestic workers, factory workers, gardeners. They don't have many resources and they work very, very hard, and their works are physically demanding. And still, they go out on December 23rd to follow their calling and being faithful to their mission.
How is this film, I mean, I know that it's obviously being distributed through the New Yorker, but how does this film operate in terms of raising awareness in a much more direct sort of activist way to help the organization? Are there ways in which you're able to, I guess, take the film and do something that brings greater awareness towards the Águilas themselves?
Well, I think there's a few subtle ways in which this happens. Of course, all our screenings, all our community events have ripple effects. And Águilas themselves are very active on social media. They have a much huger following than us, and we're connected and linked to them. So we're kind of driving traffic back and forth in that way. And what we would like to see, of course, is policy change and getting this in front of politicians. And people have ideas about how best to do that. We would love that. We just did create a really wonderful study guide with PBS. It was also on POV. And so that, again, connects it a little bit more to this activist spirit and engagement, audience engagement.
Yeah, the truth of the matter is that because the New Yorker POV and the film has gotten a huge amount of audience, and that is one of the main steps towards raising awareness and towards raising, and as KRISTY was indicating, what we ultimately want is policy change. One short documentary will not affect that, but many voices raised at the same time, many different genres and ways to denounce the same fact, certainly will be efficient. So visibility is fundamental. Visibility is there, tragically so. One colleague of us, very important anthropologist who wrote a fundamental book for both for KRISTY's and my research around migration, Jason De Leon's The Land of Open Graves, points to that visibility, because you walk the desert and you run into human bones, which is monstrous, and still it has been normalized, and through normalization it has been obscured. So radical visibility literally becomes invisible. And what our documentary is trying to do is to restore visibility so that we do not run into human remains in the desert, so that migrants don't die. And the dying of migrants is actually the origin of, as many of us know, of a set of policies that started in 1994 called prevention through deterrence. And it willfully was invented and manufactured to kill migrants who try to diverting them from urban crossing points and making them traverse unforgiving terrain. So this reality that has been in place since the 90s remains. And our documentary is a loud cry to denounce that situation.
I see a couple of questions in the Q&A box. So let me open this up to all of you. This is a question from Reed. How much time do you spend with the subject before filming, and how do you make your subjects comfortable on camera? And whoever wants to jump in can take it first.
Kristy, you want to take it?
Sure. I mean, our project is a little bit different because it's an ensemble piece, which is actually a space I really love to work in. It's not one character, it's multiple characters, and we're trying to get to know this organization as a group, and be representative of them. And of course, in this case, Maite had worked with them for years, and it didn't require, and saying that, it didn't require the same kind of intimacy that maybe going into their house and having it be about one person and their life required. So it's kind of different in that way. But we were also, volunteers, and we were following the guidelines that they put out in terms of how to volunteer with them. They're very welcoming of volunteers. They're used to having volunteers, and they have, safety precautions and important guidelines about communication that we, of course, adhered while we were working with them.
I mean, creating trust is fundamental, and trust is not easily built. So time is of, I mean, you need a lot of time to do that. So, oh yes, Águilas accepts volunteers in their midst, but with reporters and filmmakers. And as Kristy always points out, they are very clear cut. They say, we are on a very important mission here. We're not going to stop for the filmmakers. And that's what made actually Kristy's work so exemplary, and our cameraman, David Marquez, because basically we could not stop, we could not interview them when we thought it would be a good moment to do so. We had to wait for they determined the pace, and they determined when we would have a little bit of time to interview them. So trust, creating long-standing trust is fundamental, and also respecting their purpose all the time. So we were in the background, we were not the important people there, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just echo that a little bit, which is that trust is not, like, trust is earned, right? That's what, even as you just said, and I think it's really important to recognize when you are, like, for me, like, I'm working with one person primarily. I'm working with Muhammad, and I'm not entitled to anything. Like, I'm not entitled to film with him. I'm not entitled to film his art. I'm not entitled to be in his home. I'm not entitled, it's every step of the way. I have to earn the right to be in space with him. And the only way that I know how to do that is by being incredibly transparent about what my intentions are with him, having open conversations and making commitments and saying, like, this is what I'm going to do, and then sticking to those commitments. And that process over enough time is how trust is formed. And so I just think it's really important to never think that you have the right to be there. Like, you have to earn that right.
I think too, we're very sensitive to this concept of parachute journalism, especially with something as emotionally heightened as the work that the Águilas do. And we saw film crews there and had seen their work previously that just had a very different approach, and it felt very different. And we really wanted to, both with Águilas but also with the audience, build sort of a longer, I don't want to say more challenging, but just kind of a more immersive approach to how we told their story, so that it wasn't like what CNN might do, or a news organization that was sending out an affiliate, which is what we saw.
Yeah, I mean, Águilas, I feel kismet with your project, and like, to me, it doesn't feel extractive at all. And I think that's like a really important thing to be mindful of, is that, like, building a reciprocal relationship where, like, and like, I don't even know how to, like, codify or define that. It's just something energetically that I think certain artists and filmmakers can show up and have, which is that, like, I'm not here just to, like, take, right? I like the phrase parachute journalism, it's like, I'm not here to just, like, pull out what I need. Like, this is a relationship, and it's, like, predicated on respect. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I respond to what you were saying, Kristy.
This question's from Marion about Águilas. And she wants to know why you decided to show the remains of refugees. Was there a debate there?
We thought long and hard about that, and deliberated intensely, and felt like we did need to show what was happening there. We felt like we wanted to have earned the audience's trust by the time we show it, by sort of our rigor and our tone. And we chose also to make a film that's, you know, maybe a little slower paced. There's no music, less quick cutting. So ideally it lands as it landed for us potentially. You know, it's a huge and tremendous thing to witness and bear witness to. And you know, we didn't want it on too long to overplay it. We didn't want to, of course, sensationalize it. We wanted to do it as respectfully as we could. And I think it's also why the voices in the beginning of the film and the end of the film are so important, because it links back to what this means for the families who have lost people in the crossing.
Yeah, so yeah, I think what KRISTY just said is very important, because the voices basically create this round structure. It's a rounded story. It starts with the voices and ends with the voices. And the voices are a constant and tragic and harrowing plea for help. And Águilas responds to that by looking for remains and often finding the remains, and that brings closure to the family. The true tragedy of this, though, is that though the voices tend to round up the documentary, they open it up again, because, you know, Águilas finds remains, but the voices keep coming, families keep calling, and bodies keep appearing, and remains are still scattered in the desert.
This is sort of a related question from Jules Minton. Both docs are focused on telling a living story through artifacts created in one case and found in the other. Mohamed's decision to show the destruction of property instead of human life per se is echoed by the story in the bones by the Águilas. If KRISTY and Maite had encountered either a rescue or human remains other than the bones, how would that have changed the film?
I think that it would have changed the film radically. We would not have filmed a decomposed body. I think both KRISTY and I, and we should include David Marquez, come on into this, were very clear about that. So no, because what is remarkable about Águilas del Desierto is what we like to call their somber dignity, the dignity with which they do this job. There's no histrionics of any kind. There's this contained sadness and this professional behavior, because Águilas has amassed a lot of wisdom about what they do, the state of the remains. And the film shows it when it says, you know, we find bones here because the water actually moved the bones, etc. They have all this, and actually they do have amassed self-taught forensic wisdom. So somber dignity, respect would not fit the sensationalism of portraying bodies beyond bones.
And I think if it was a rescue, we would not, to protect the anonymity of the people who would, of course, be in a precarious legal situation.
Okay, so we have one last one, which is a good question for everyone here. So it's a question from William Higbee. I'm struggling editing my documentary. I'm interested in learning more about collaboration during doc editing. What did your editing process look like, and how did you work with your editor and split the creative collaboration?
I'll start, but I mean, oh boy. The documentary editing process is hard. very, very hard. Maybe also Sisyphean in some ways. It's, you know, I'll just sort of like talk out my process, which was that, you know, I worked with a really incredible editor, Brad Turner, in New York. And it started with us watching all the footage together. I really think that that's absolutely critical. And I think that also it's good to give yourself a little bit of space between filming your footage and editing your footage, because there's so many preconceived ideas that you have, or there's so much intention into why you shot the footage that you did. But when you get into the edit, all those intentions kind of need to go away, and you need to sort of give space to like what you actually got, which honestly takes a lot of time to be able to see. Like you just have that sort of vision of the actual shoot that needs to go away. So give space, you know, between the shoot and the editing, watch all the footage. And honestly, I went away. Like I went away for a little bit and allowed him to take a pass, which I'd never done before. And you know, I don't know whether that was the right thing to do, because then we took it all apart and built it all together again. But it was useful. It was useful, at least for me, to like unfetter myself from what my original intentions were. And like I've heard lots of different metaphors in terms of like, and there's lots of different editing styles where I hear some people talk about it almost as sculpture, where it's like the footage is like your marble and you're just chipping away, pulling things out until it has form. And that's your process. And then other people have a much more sort of like free form juxtaposing style, which is like you pair things together that you wouldn't necessarily think of and see whether the sort of dialectic between like two opposing images can create something new. So I just think it's a place that you have to give yourself time and patience, really watch all your footage. I can never say that too much. And play with it. Even if the footage is completely harrowing, there still needs to be a sense of like play and possibility in order to engender different possibilities than what you filmed. So that's the best I can say for now.
I would say for us, and I, you know, as someone who's also edited documentary and teaches documentary editing, I feel the struggle. It's quite a luxury when you can work with someone else who can have the eyes that you don't have, that fresh perspective. But I will say it was new to me to work with all three of us kind of in the room often. It made for maybe a longer editing process, but also I think it's a film that has, you know, we wanted to give it a lot of restraint and a lot of dignity and precision. And so that was very important to really take time and mull over the decisions we were making and watch it together. And, you know, we would come at it from different perspectives of what was important to us. And ultimately editing is, I think, almost always this balancing act, right? And we're trying to, you know, bring an audience along, give them just enough information, you know, create something kind of sensorial with sound and picture. In our case, balancing the search with the mission of the Águilas themselves, with something more reflective about the migrants and their families.
Yeah, I would like to add that for me, it was an absolutely wonderful experience. And I cannot thank Kristy and Nico enough for everything I learned. It was so wonderful for me because as a professor in the humanities, stories and storytelling is what I like to study and to do, and to see how out of that marble, as Jimmy was saying, this shape was coming out. This story, the pieces were starting to fit and create a narrative, and the whole story made sense. And it was a harrowing process because, again, we were constrained, but this obsession of all three of us to really, really make a film that is contained in its emotion and therefore highly emotion triggering without falling into sensationalism. So that kept us basically tight in some way, but also very focused. We knew what we wanted to do. We knew the tone that we wanted to reach. And we worked for 3 days basically together, hours on end, and the whole collaborative process of sitting they are, again, for me, a true privilege because I'm not a filmmaker, sitting there with KRISTY and with Nico, and to see how you can build a story with images and not with words, which is what I'm used to, was actually wonderful. I think it is really, truly a highlight in my life and in my professional career. You know, it was an epiphanic moment for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, like, Alex, you asked me when I was done shooting, and like it's actually much easier for me to know when I'm done shooting than when I'm done editing. Like there's the old joke, which is like, great films aren't made, they're abandoned, which is to say, like, I could be tinkering right now. Like I watched the films tonight and I was like, oh man, I can make a couple edits on A Broken House still. Like, and it's, you know, they really had to wrest it away from me. So it's also have beautiful people in your corner who know when to tell you to stop.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. This was a real pleasure. And I'm so grateful that we were able to share your films with our students and alumni. And I wish you all the best with the shortlist, but also with the life of these films and your next projects. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
Pleasure to be here. Congrats on Águilas. I love the film.
See you again, Jimmy.
Yes, you too.
Bye. See you soon.
Yes. Take care, y'all.